Dr. Jayraj's Literary Lens presents Part 1, Lecture 14, Post-Gender Theory. This lecture is prepared and presented by Dr. S. Joseph Arul Jayraj, former head and associate professor of English, St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu, India. A note of caution. A lecture should not be viewed as a finished monument of closed information, but rather as a catalyst for intellectual discovery rooted in productive incompleteness. Instead of seeking purely polished, airtight presentations, listeners should value the uncertainties and unanswered questions that spark further research. By embracing these frayed ends rather than treating knowledge as a static product, the audience is invited to transform from passive recipients into active architects of new ideas, allowing the lecture to serve as a starting point for their ongoing inquiry. Introduction. Gender is a big part of how we see ourselves and others, but what if it did not have to be limited to just male or female? Post-gender theory is an idea that challenges the traditional understanding of gender as a fixed category. Instead, it suggests that gender is a social construct, something made up by society that we can choose or change. This talk explores post-gender theory in simple terms, explaining its roots, key ideas, and how it affects society today. In recent years, scholars have begun to talk about post-gender theory. The term suggests a world in which gender is no longer the main way people think about themselves or are organized socially. Instead of seeing gender as a fixed binary, male-female, post-gender theory imagines societies where gender categories are fluid, optional, or even irrelevant. Literature, novels, poems, short stories, and even plays offers a laboratory for testing these ideas. Writers can imagine characters who transgress, discard, or reinvent gender roles, allowing readers to picture possible futures. This talk asks, how do authors use post-gender theory in their works, and what effects does this have on readers? Origins of post-gender theory. Post-gender theory builds on earlier ideas like queer theory and post-structuralism, which argue that categories like gender are not natural, but are shaped by culture and history. A key thinker in this area is Judith Butler, who wrote about gender as performative. This means that gender is something people act out through behaviors, clothes, or roles, rather than being something people are born with. The term post-gender theory was popularized by Baker-Spiss in his 2012 book, Post-Human, Post-Gender. Baker-Spiss argues that traditional gender roles are oppressive and that moving beyond them allows individuals more freedom to express themselves. Thinkers like Raewyn Connell and Judith Butler have also contributed to this conversation by showing how gender is not just personal, but tied to power and social rules. Key concepts of post-gender theory. Post-gender theory has three main ideas. 1. Gender as a spectrum. Instead of seeing gender as male/female, post-gender theory sees it as a range of identities. People can identify as non-binary, neither male nor female, gender fluid, changing over time, or even feel no need to label their gender at all. 2. Challenging social norms. Society often tells people how to act based on their assigned sex at birth. For example, boys play with trucks, girls play with dolls. Post-gender theory rejects these rules and encourages people to make their own choices. For example, a non-binary person might choose to wear colorful clothes or use names that feel authentic to them. 3. Technology and freedom. Advances in medicine and technology, like hormone therapy or gender-affirming surgeries, allow people to transition and live beyond traditional gender roles. This supports the idea that gender can be changed intentionally. Implications for society. Post-gender theory has big implications for how we live and work. Schools, for instance, are starting to use more inclusive language and allow students to pick restrooms and pronouns that fit their identity. In the workplace, companies like Salesforce now have gender-neutral bathrooms and flexible dress codes to respect all employees. However, this theory also faces pushback. Some people argue that biological sex differences matter, especially in areas like sports or healthcare. For example, debates about whether women's sports teams should allow trans women to compete have sparked controversy. Post-gender theory responds by emphasizing personal identity over biology. But this remains a contested issue. How is post-gender theory used in literature? The answer is organized into 4 sections. 1. A brief definition of post-gender theory. 2. Early literary experiments, modernist and feminist works. 3. Contemporary speculative and science fiction examples. 4. Why post-gender narratives matter for readers and scholars. Each section includes concrete examples and simple explanations with in-text citations and an MLA-formatted bibliography at the end. 1. Defining post-gender theory. Post-gender theory grew out of feminist and queer studies. Judith Butler's claim that gender is performative, something we do, not something we are, opened the door to imagining societies where the performance is no longer required. Jack Halberstam later coined post-gender to describe cultures that have moved beyond the binary altogether. Key ideas include gender as optional. People may choose not to identify with any gender label. Fluid embodiment. Bodies can be biologically, technologically, or socially altered so that traditional gender markers, for example, breasts, facial hair, lose their cultural meaning. Equal social structures. Institutions, workplaces, schools, families are organized without gendered expectations. These concepts become tools for writers who can embed them in plots, character design, and world building. 2. Early literary experiments. 2.1. Virginia Woolf's Orlando. Woolf's novel follows a protagonist who lives for centuries and changes sex from a man to a woman, Woolf 84. By making gender a mutable trait, Woolf hints at a world where identity is not fixed. Although she does not use the term post-gender, the narrative anticipates its logic. Orlando's social status and personal freedom shift dramatically when the gender change occurs, suggesting that gender itself can be a social device. 2.2. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Atwood's dystopia portrays a society that reinforces binary gender roles, but the novel simultaneously critiques them. The narrator, Offred, imagines a future where women could be free of prescribed reproductive functions. Atwood 101. By presenting the oppressive binary so starkly, Atwood invites readers to imagine the opposite, a post-gender world where reproductive roles are not gender-assigned. 2.3. Toni Morrison's Beloved. While not overtly about gender, Beloved destabilizes traditional gender expectations through its portrayal of strong, self-determined female characters who defy the submissive role. Morrison's lyrical language blurs boundaries among mother, lover, and survivor, opening a space where gendered identity is fluid rather than fixed. Morrison, 57. These early works lay a foundation for later writers who would explicitly imagine societies beyond gender. 3. Contemporary speculative and science fiction examples. 3.1. Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. Le Guin's planet Gethin is inhabited by ambisexual people who become male or female only during a monthly period called Kimmer. Le Guin, 45. The novel's narrator, Genli I, struggles to understand a culture where gender is temporary and therefore politically irrelevant. Le Guin directly enacts post-gender theory. Social hierarchies, power dynamics, and personal relationships all function without a fixed gender binary. Le Guin, 61. 3.2. Octavia E. Butler's Dawn, Lilith's Dream. In this novel, humanity is revived by alien Oankali who manipulate genetics, creating children who may possess both male and female traits simultaneously. Butler, 112. Butler uses biotechnology to show a post-gender future in which bodies are deliberately designed to transcend gendered expectations. The gene talk among characters reflects a cultural shift where gender is no longer a primary identifier. Butler, 118. 3.3. N.K. Jemison's The Fifth Season. Jemison's world is built on the idea of orogenes, people who can control seismic energy. While gender is present, Jemison purposefully decouples power from gendered stereotypes. Both male and female orogenes face the same oppression, and the narrative focuses on survival rather than gender roles. Jemison, 78. The novel subtly pushes toward a post-gender perspective by emphasizing other axes of identity: ability, class, race, over gender. 3.4. Contemporary Young Adult Fiction. Luna, by Julianne Peters. Luna follows a teenager who identifies as gender fluid and uses they/them pronouns. The story explores how families, schools, and peers respond to a non-binary identity in a world that still largely assumes a gender binary. Peters, 33. Peters' straightforward language and realistic setting make post-gender theory accessible to younger readers, showing how everyday life can integrate fluid gender identities. 3.5. Poetry and Digital Media. The Transfeminist Poems of Andrea Gibson. Gibson's spoken-word poems blend gender-fluid pronouns, cyber technology, and radical love, presenting a post-gender aesthetic where the body and language merge. In The Madness Vase, Gibson writes, "I am not a man, nor a woman / I am a whole, a song, a storm." This poetic embodiment demonstrates that post-gender theory is not limited to narrative fiction, but also informs lyrical and performance art. 4. Why does post-gender literature matter? 1. Rethinking power relations. When gender is removed as a foundational category, power can be examined on other grounds: class, race, ability, or technology. Readers can see how oppression works when gender is taken out of the equation. 2. Expanding empathy. Experiencing characters who live without gender norms encourages readers to imagine life beyond their own cultural assumptions. Empathy grows when the other is not defined by gender but by shared humanity. Butler, 21. 3. Influencing real-world dialogue. Literary depictions of post-gender societies feed into academic and activist conversations about gender-neutral policies, pronoun usage, and transgender rights. For instance, the popularity of Le Guin's Gathenian Society has been cited in debates on gender-neutral bathrooms. Miller, 87. 4. Technological imagination. Science fiction works that link post-gender ideas with biotechnology, for example, Butler's Dawn, help readers contemplate how future medical advances might affect gender identity. This imaginative space can guide ethical discussions about gene editing and body autonomy. Klein, 54. In sum, post-gender literature does more than entertain. It provides a sandbox for scholars, activists, and ordinary readers to rehearse a world where gender is optional, fluid, or absent. 5. Criticisms and limitations. Critics say post-gender theory is too abstract and may ignore the real-world challenges faced by LGBTQ+ individuals, especially trans people of color or those in poverty. They argue that focusing on deconstructing gender might not address immediate needs like legal protections or healthcare access. Additionally, some worry that erasing traditional gender roles could alienate people who feel comforted by them. For example, someone who strongly identifies as masculine might resist the idea that gender is flexible. This shows that while theory is important, personal identity is deeply personal and varies. Conclusion. Post-gender theory offers a bold vision of a world where people are free to define their gender without limits. By rejecting fixed categories, it challenges us to rethink social norms and support individual expression. While critics raise valid concerns, the theory opens important conversations about freedom, identity, and equality. As society continues to evolve, post-gender theory reminds us that change is possible, both in ideas and in lives. Post-gender theory, though a relatively new term, has deep roots in the modernist and feminist literature of the 20th century. Early works like Woolf's Orlando hinted at gender fluidity, while contemporary writers, from Le Guin to Gibson, fully embed post-gender ideas in their worlds and characters. By removing gender as a primary social filter, these texts open up fresh ways of thinking about power, identity, and the future of humanity. For readers and researchers, engaging with these books offers a clear illustration of how theory can shape storytelling and, conversely, how stories can test theoretical limits. As societies continue to grapple with gender diversity, literature that explores post-gender possibilities will remain a crucial site of imagination and debate. Thank you.